Welcome to The Maintenance Mindset, an audio-video podcast brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Paul Rose, and over the more than 3 decades in the apartment industry, I've had roles that include being on-site, providing services as a vendor, creating and delivering multiple education programs, and active association work. This podcast is centered on the often overlooked role that our on-site maintenance workers play. You know, the men and women that respond in the middle of the night to the toilet call, or the after hours, it's really hot in my apartment request, or my favorite, my ring fell down the drain, get over here now. In other words, the often unsung heroes who are responsible for asset preservation and resident satisfaction. Working in multifamily maintenance provides interesting, sometimes amusing, and often fascinating stories and viewpoints. My encouragement to you is this: whatever you do it with a maintenance mindset. Hey there, everyone. This episode picks up right where we left off last time with Matt Trotter. We're talking about what technicians need to know in order to service this new refrigerant. And spoiler alert, it's a lot of the same with what we should have already been doing. Let's join. I think the most telling statement I've heard discussed by manufacturers, by trainers, by schools, by service providers is this: if as a service technician you are working correctly by manufacturer recommendation with R410A, you will not experience an issue going to an A2L refrigerant.
That is eloquently said and very accurate. If you follow
as an example there,
as an example, if you follow the manufacturer's recommendations, there's always, here's how you install it. And then there's, by the way, here's a recommendation by the manufacturer. If you follow those guidelines, you will not skip a beat with the new gases. You will be perfectly fine all the way through. No question about it.
And an example of that is when we go to braze a system, we are supposed to be recommended to be what I've heard referred to as dripping nitrogen into the line set, to where as you put your oxyacetylene torch, the inside of that pipe should have non-pressurized nitrogen inside, dripping through or blowing through to prevent oxidation inside the copper pipe. Well, that has always been manufacturer recommended practice. With A2Ls, it is absolutely required to do that, or the system, you won't even get outside anywhere near the first week, let alone going through the warranty period on the new equipment. And it has to do with that refrigerant reacting to the carbon that builds up inside that pipe. So, yes, it is now required to use that with an R32 or R454B system, but it's always, even back to R22, those 10 SEER, the older systems, it was recommended.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never heard it called dripping. That's interesting. That's a funny one. I'll have to think about that one, because, like, nitrogen sweeping, you want to get rid of all the oxygen. That's the main goal. It's an inert gas. Just don't pressurize it. Otherwise, you'll have a hard time making the joints and brazing it. But it's also important to know that the new gases, we absolutely can use our torches. We're good to go for the installation. There's no additional things you have to do. You can make sure you protect the service valves, but get right in there with your torches, sweep it with nitrogen. I like to do a pressure then release tactic. So I get rid of all the oxygen. Once I let the nitrogen start to blowing out with the Schrader cores out, I feel it starting to slow down as it's kind of leaving, and then I start to make my joint because there's no oxygen in there, and those joints should take me less than 3 minutes. I mean, they're very quick if you're using oxyacetylene. The cleanliness is so key to these systems. You're right, the new gases do not like to have that additional carbon that's in there. Not that nothing will explode, nothing will be damaging like that, but how they function and run is really important. If we're using R32, let's just say for that gas has been around for 20 years easily. It's been a standalone gas since 2012, and a lot of technicians don't realize this. They've been working with it this whole time because it's 50% of 410A. It's in that gas. That gas uses 40% less charge than 410A. So it's almost half the charge. Now, when you have less charge, you have a denser gas, and it has different velocity and movements to it. If you start having a dirty system, that's going to slow down the rate at which it goes through, and you're using less gas at the same time, that's going to cause more freezing. It's going to cause definitely issues with your superheat, and the compressor is not going to like it at all. So keeping it clean is really important. That's a great point. We've recommended this for decades. Now it's required.
Absolutely. So it does come down to using best practice, and I'll point you back, audience, back to Chadwell Supply's webpage has lists of how to do these things and what needs to happen, which does bring me to a question, Matt. I know you've heard them, other than the highlight I did of propane. There's no propane in any of these refrigerants. Nope. But what other myths or falsehoods or misunderstandings or just downright lies have you heard that our technicians are not only exposed to, but I think they're believing? What have you heard?
Oh, the internet is just a flurry with things. It is, and it's surprising because it's myths about the equipment, and then it's gas versus gas myths. Because this is the first time in history we have the ability to choose between which gas we want to use. When we transitioned from 22, we had 407 as an option, but it's quickly faded away, giving way to 410A, and it became the only gas. Well, now we have manufacturers like R32. Goodman is going to be using R32, and so is Brothers. Chadwell Supply picked 32 because of the gas qualities. And everybody else is going to be using R454B. So it's interesting, the myths that came out. One of the myths that came out was the service valves on the condensers. They're going to be left-handed threads. Now, this is important, though, because when you have a flammable liquid, which is what these gases are, just like acetylene, the thread of the tank has to be left-handed so that you have to think what you're doing and what you're attaching it to. So the recovery cylinder and the new gas tanks will be left-handed threads because they're required by Department of Transportation to be that way. The system is not. The system is standard thread. Your gauges hook right up to it. Nothing to worry about there. 1/4 inch, just like anything else. That is normal. To do a counter thread on the systems would really mess with everybody, and that would be too far. So that is one myth that is just not true. Another myth is, and this one hit me because it's a common sense thing that kind of comes out. A company had said, if you want to install R32, you have to remove the gas out of the system before you install it. Now, right? It gives you a, huh? One, how do I get the gas out of the condenser without putting my torches to it? So right. Do I have to braze it shut and then open the valves and then release the gas and then put it in a recovery cylinder and then braze it in? That doesn't work out. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So that was one of the funniest myths I heard. The R32 system and the 454B system, they install exactly the same as each other. They're going to come charged with gas. It's going to be, depending on which gas you use, it'll either be 40% less charged than 410A or 10% less charged than 410A. And you install them just like a 410A system. It's simple. It's easy. It's safe. There's no harm there whatsoever.
So then the first myth that you heard, the reverse threads.
Yeah.
How do I, with my right-hand thread gauges, go up to a left-hand thread tank or recovery tank? What do I need to do?
So they will have adapters. We sell just adapters for the tanks that go from righty to lefty, and lefty to righty, or you can get a hose. Now, I'm an analog guy when it comes to manifold sets, and I always suggest getting a new set of gauges for new gas. That's just, I'm old school. It's just, I want to be holding this set of gauges in my hand. I want to be looking at the temperature pressure charts that are for the gas that I'm working with, and I don't want to get confused because the pressures are very close to 410A. And a lot of guys on their suction gauge, they got a black line going right across, and that's what they're shooting for. Charge it to here, call it done. Well, if they use the new gas in the same gauges, they're going to charge it to the wrong, and they're going to have issues. So getting a new set of gauges is great. Most A2L gauges are coming with the adapter. UniWeld's got a great 3-port manifold, and it comes with the adapter. Nice. If you have digital gauges, you can buy the hoses, get A2L hoses, and get the adapter with it. Like if you got the S-Mans, they have an update for those. You can get the PT chart in there. Don't replace those unless you really want to. I wouldn't want to have, just replace that just because they're a little more pricey, but they got a lot of good qualities to them. So you can keep those and just replace the hoses. Definitely get new hoses. They have to be A2L compatible hoses. That's important.
Yeah. So a couple of things to unpack from what you're saying. Yes, the tanks will change for an A2L refrigerant, and that's because of that slight increase in flammability. And correct. When we go from the A1 refrigerant, R410A, or any of the others, to an A2L, literally the difference in flammability is about this much. And for those of you listening, my fingers are less than an inch apart, and that's probably an exaggeration on how much. But that change is just enough to put it over that line above A1. Correct. And even the categorization is that it's so close to that A1 line, they made the new category of A2L, low flame propagation, as you were mentioning. Absolutely. So from a tool standpoint, there is an adapter that will let our normal hoses go. But I am very happy that you agree with me in my continuing medical condition of TAS, which is an acronym, medically prescribed tool acquisition syndrome. I have that. So
it's a big deal out there, and there's not enough support for it, to be honest.
You're correct. Yes.
I'm thinking about starting a group and getting jackets. I mean, it just
I agree. Yes, jackets more than the hat. I'm not a fan of the hats. We need the jackets in order to do that.
Embroidered, the whole deal. I mean, the whole song and dance. You got to have it all. Because acquiring those tools is a big deal.
Yes. That's it. But along those same standpoints, though, there are changes we do have to be aware of regarding the tools. I mean, that's not a myth. To that end, on Chadwell's website, again, in the resources, there is a listing of the tools. In summary, many of the tools will function that we use for A1 refrigerants, they will function in A2L environments, possibly with some changes. I mean, I prefer analog. I'm like you. I definitely prefer the analog gauges, but I have found benefit in digital gauges. The nice thing about digital gauges is the majority of them allow for reprogramming, updating of their software. If you have questions, where is the resource outside of Chadwell Supply's webpage should a technician go to find out if their specific equipment is compatible?
So you can go to, well, let's talk about what the equipment is, because that's where it
Okay.
kind of makes the big difference. Gauges, hoses definitely needs to be changed out. The hoses need to be changed out for sure. The manifold is always a recommendation to do that, just so that you have a different manifold with a new gas. It's just muscle memory part of it. The other three main things are your leak detection, depending on how you do it. Whether if you're nitrogen and soap bubbles, no worries there. If you use electronic leak detectors, then you have to go to the manufacturer's site, whether it be Infocon, whether it be, Tech or TIFF, whoever it is you might work with. You need to go to their site and look up that model number. A lot of it will have it written on the side, but looking at which model it is determines as to whether or not it is A2L compatible. Those guys, when you're sniffing for gas, it's actually looking for the gas itself. And sometimes they have a heater or an electrode in the tip that break it down and separate the fluorine and everything from it. And that's what they're looking for. You don't want to have a little electric heater in the end when we're looking for a mildly flammable gas. Not a great idea. Now, Infocon
it's like looking for natural gas with a cigarette lighter. I mean, we've never done that,
never,
by the way.
No. Only speculation.
That's correct. And that's wrong. For those of you listening, know that sarcasm sign is big.
Sarcasm is blinking.
Don't do that.
Never do that. So we have an Infocon at Chapel Supply that we sell that we didn't realize it was. And then we went to the manufacturer, we looked it up, and like, oh no, this one works for HFOs and A2Ls. Perfect. The other two is your vacuum pump and your recovery machine. The vacuum pump, this is a UL requirement, not an EPA requirement. This is a UL about the vacuum pump, because the vacuum pump, once you pull down into a vacuum, you're going to boil a refrigerant out of the oil, which is going to pass through the pump. I can guarantee you your vacuum pump is not A2L compatible, because we didn't have any of them in the States up until this last year. Now we're going to do a rolling change. I don't even think the price is different, because it's just a covered electronics, and it's a vacuum pump in all its glory. So you cover up the electronics and then it's set to go. So you definitely probably have to get one of those to do service work. And the other is your recovery machine. Your recovery machine might be compatible. You can read on the side, it'll tell you what refrigerants it works with. And if it says in there, works with HFO or 1234YF, 1234YF, if that gas, if it works with that, then you're good. That recovery machine will work with the new A2Ls. If it doesn't say that or any of those categories, then look up online the model number through the manufacturer. They all have sites for it. If you look in our catalog, well, you said outside of Chadwell, but if you look in our catalog, we have it stamped on the side now. So
yes,
makes it easy. But you would have to go manufacturer to find out if they are compatible with the A2Ls. And then you have to have at least one of those for sure, because EPA requires you to recover the gas. You have to have a device that will do it safely and put it into not just your standard recovery cylinder. It's no longer your yellow-gray standard tank from DOT. Now it's yellow-gray with a red stripe and counter thread for the tank.
Yeah, so we are changing some things, but not everything.
Hand tools, perfectly fine. Cordless drills, everything else, perfectly fine. Make sure they're double insulated. Most of them are these days. We've already kind of moved past that, era. When you're discharging capacitors, it's recommended not to use a screwdriver, but to use a resistor. They actually make these little pen resistors you can just put across them. They're very cheap on Amazon, and it just discharges the cap and you're good to go. So the big thing will be, does the technician or the maintenance tech, is he paying attention to his surrounding areas? Is he looking for those electrical hazards? Is he looking for, areas where there might be an ignition source possibly? That's what's going to be the big change for the new gas is, all right, now I have to relook at this pod of condensers in a different way.
And to that standpoint, again, it was always recommended we did that, because yes, A2L is classified as slightly flammable, but R410A, R22, they were potentially flammable in the right conditions. Just
Everything
now, the conditions have hit a slightly higher threshold or lower threshold, depending on how you look at it, to where now we have to have the requirement to pay attention to that stuff, when really we should have been paying attention to that stuff all along.
Yeah, we really have. We took it for granted.
Yeah, and to that end, there is more that stays the same than changing from a quantity standpoint. If we are servicing our systems correctly, there is a very small quantity of things that require updating. I mean, we still have the requirement before we go to worry about refrigerant charging, no matter what refrigerant we use. Before we go get the jug, we still have to verify those things that we're supposed to be verifying.
Absolutely. We're still looking for leaks, pressure test, do a standing pressure test for the system pressure, whether it be 450 PSI with dry nitrogen, do an active leak search, spray your joints, make sure nothing's, bubbling, and then letting that off and pulling a good deep vacuum, getting that vacuum down to that 500 marker. All these are absolutely the same as 410A. That's never changed. It needs to be dehydrated. And just as a suggestion, if you don't have a micron gauge out there and you've never used one, it's time to start.
Yes.
We're still using POE oil, polyester oil. Polyester oil has a high affinity for moisture, and it likes to make acid when it's really damp and humid inside the piping. Using your vacuum pump and dry nitrogen, those two things dehydrate it, which is important. You sweep it with dry nitrogen, it absorbs some moisture, you let it out. Then you hook up your vacuum pump with new oil. You replace the oil in the vacuum pump.
More than once a year? Really?
More than once a year. It's not an annual thing. Every 2 or 3 cycles, you want to replace that oil because it's the filter and it pulls it down in. And if you don't get down below 20,000 microns, we say to go to 500 because then we know it's dehydrated. But if we don't get below 20,000, we're not even dehydrating the system. It doesn't start dehydrating until under 20,000 microns. If you're using your gauge to just go down to 29 inches of mercury, which is as far down as the needle drops in the gauge, you're leaving a very humid system. And that's going to be causing issues and going to be causing compressor failures. You have to pull it down to that 500. All this is standard practice for any HVAC technician out there.
And from that standpoint, I mean, another myth for us to talk about what our maintenance technicians believe is that a vacuum pump only removes vapor. It doesn't remove liquid water. It doesn't remove carbon. It doesn't remove anything else except gas, a vapor. So that means that in order to remove that moisture, we're decreasing the atmospheres inside that system down to a point to where the liquid water boils and becomes, in effect, steam at the temperature that the system is under. Water will boil at 70 degrees when it is below 1,000 microns. And you can't see that on the analog gauge. No. You have to have a micron gauge. And I'm telling you right now, property managers and management companies, if you want to buy your maintenance technicians that holiday present that we all look for at the end of the year, a micron gauge is an awesome one to get, along with training in how to pull that vacuum proper and deep enough. Your residents and your bottom line will thank you in longevity of your systems.
Oh, if you don't pull a good vacuum, I would be surprised if you make it out of the 1 year with that system. I mean, the amount of acid that gets made, the amount of oil that gets left in line sets, in the evaporators, all this. I mean, you need to be cleaned up, and you need to have gauges to do so. And micron gauges are not expensive. They're a tool to go in your bag. They are not. CPS makes a great one. and it's really handy. It's easy to work with. I've had it for over 15 years. It still works and functions how it's supposed to. They last. They're good tools. You got to have those things, because that process of sweeping and then pulling a vacuum and sweeping and pulling a vacuum is what gets rid of a lot of that junk and garbage from a bad install. And the other
Yes.
thing that sometimes doesn't happen a lot is the filter dryer needs to be changed. That's a bit, I swear it does.
No.
It does. And you know what? If you ever look down inside the condenser and you see this big blue can coming off of the discharge line, that's not the filter dryer. Don't change that one out. That's just a muffler. Leave that one alone. The other one's got to be, in the liquid line to help clean up that system. And if it's a dirty system, you can add a bigger filter dryer to catch more stuff.
But those filter dryers, though, from a technician standpoint, they do have a limited capacity.
Yes, they do. Yes,
that capacity is a very, very small quantity of liquid water that gets stored in the desiccant inside.
Yes, the little bit of vapor water has enough desiccant to pull that in. But if it's gotten so humid where you get below dew point, you left the system open for a long period of time, it's in that transition, it's not hot, it's cooler, those pipes, they could sweat internally, you could get moisture in there. It's a lot. It's more than they think. It always is to take out. And those dryers, they do not have enough capacity to do both. You'd have to replace with a larger one.
Reading the instructions, I remember way back in the day, back when we used to get the new system, and that system had more documentation provided from the manufacturer than just the one paper. Now it's one paper that's folded out. We used to get an entire booklet on the proper way to install. Now it's found online. You get a QR code, take a picture of it. It's all online. So the information's still there. But I remember reading in that system that if you left it open to the air longer than 15 minutes, meaning you cut the old system out, put the new system on, if it was longer than 15 minutes that your system was open to the atmosphere, you were to treat that system as if it was contaminated.
Yep.
And essentially what that means is you pull it down, you charge it appropriately when it's dry, then you let it run for, if I remember right, it was 100 hours, and then you come back and test the filter dryer.
Yeah, and that's runtime too. So it's like it was, either you ran, if you did it consistently, you could do 48 hours if you had a consistent run. If not, you go 100 hours because it cycles so often. But once you do that, the only way to clean it is to use the refrigerant in the system, depending on how bad it is, and then either replace the gas or just replace the dryer and then check the refrigerant to see if it has been contaminated as well. And that is a lengthy, costly process to do.
So the lesson there is, one, and kind of this takes us back to earlier in our conversation, is be proactive.
Yes.
And to that end, technicians on site. We all know right now is the middle of winter and we are still busy, but this time of year is a little bit slower. So I would recommend this time of year, get out your oxyacetylene torches, take out some copper pipe, and do yourself a favor. Practice. It is much easier in the convenience and confines isolated in your shop.
Yes.
To practice, get a good bead around the outside, do a good job of cleaning your line sets, make sure that you've got the copper and understanding of how your tools work. That way you can decrease the amount of time that your system is open.
Absolutely. I taught a class the other week for 40 on brazing techniques, how to sweep nitrogen, what it looks like, how to do it, how to wrap valves, how to keep them clean, how to keep them safe. And then oxyacetylene 101 we went through. And they a lot of them use MAP gas or they use turbo torch, which are fine as well. If you're comfortable with that, that's great. But both turbo torch for sure makes a larger ball of heat. So if I'm trying to work on a pipe, it's going to not just engulf that pipe, it's going to engulf everything else behind it as well. So it just spreads out longer and more. If you use oxyacetylene, it's a very acute flame and you can angle it and move it around. But I found as I was watching a lot of these technicians working through this, they were not understanding that the Silfloss 15 follows the heat where it needs to go. So if I can make an acute heat and get it moving, it does a much better job. And they're making these collar joints, these little bitty collar joints. And they would make one. I'd look at it. I was like, it looks good. I don't think it penetrated very far, but it looks good. And I would take it and I would hit the pipe with my wrench and it would crack because it was just on the far lip. I was like, okay, now we learned that you need to get more heat and penetrate that more. And it takes practice. It takes learning that, hey, I've got more time on this pipe than I think I do. It's a blind joint. Well, let me practice doing it in a comfortable position. Then I can know what it feels like and how it flows. That is a great suggestion. And not enough of our maintenance techs do that. Take some copper, take the time, and get that skill honed because it's a craft skill.
It is. And one thing to be aware of is many of the manufacturers now for these A2L systems are putting a stub of copper, the stub of pipe that comes out of those service valves is no longer swedged.
Nope.
Meaning it's a straight pipe out. And the reasoning for that is so many municipalities now are requiring all connections to be flame-free connections. So you've got systems like Zoom Fitting or ProPress or all of the varieties of other brand names that I am not endorsing one over the other because I can't think of the names now. But that is a foundational change that as technicians, there are other options if brazing is not your forte, because I get it.
Absolutely,
it's not, to your point, it is as much of an art as it is a skill.
AirQuest, for one. You know, we at Channel Supply, we sell AirQuest. They'll have straight pipe in 3/8 and 5/8, 3/4, depending on what it is. Usually probably more like 5/8, but that's straight pipe coming off. And a lot of, if you look inside their system, they've got double O-ring ProPress all over the place or whatever option there is. I was not in the era of ProPress. I know it works and functions well. It works really great on smaller pipe, on straight lines, and it works really well on new copper and clean copper for sure. Does a great job. But I don't know the history of how long it lasts after a 5-year mark on with vibration, with being unlevel, with movement or any of that. I don't have that data. I know there's a lot of good things that come out with it, but it's your choice. Those tools for the ProPress, they're $1,800, $2,400. They're no joke, but you will be able to get, flameless options. And if there's a regulation that says it has to be done in your area, then you have no choice. You better learn to be really good at it. But I'll tell you, a lot of these line sets that come off from multifamily, those pipes aren't round anymore. Those things are square and oval, and some are triangles for some reason. I mean, they
just because the landscapers run over them 400 or 500 times, I don't understand why they're not round anymore. What?
Oh, so true. So true.
All right. Well, Matt, we have had a wonderful time today talking about the A2L transition, myths that are believed. And again, there's no propane. This is not, we're not talking about a flamethrower outside a building anymore. That's not happening. It is a tiny change from a flammability standpoint. We've talked about tools and resources that can happen for that system, and the amount of information that Chadwell has available to anybody If
Anybody.
you are not a Chadwell Supply customer, you don't have to have a password to get that information, right?
It's all open. Yep. Completely public.
And is it only air conditioning information that you guys have?
Oh, goodness, no. Anything that we sell, we have paperwork on. Water heaters, even some conversations about the transitions that are happening with water heaters in 2026 and 2029. You can go and check that out as well. But all of our appliances, every appliance that we sell, faucets, how to change them out, what the flow rate is for your space, industry changes, anything and everything we have. If there's a document that says how to install it, how to work on it, or how to size it, it is in there.
Fantastic. Well, as we finish up on the maintenance mindset, all the guests are asked the same question at the end. And the question is, Matthew Trotter, in your career, what mindset has led to your success?
What mindset has led to my success? So I have spent my entire career in HVAC. That has been my one true love. I was a farmer. I'm a terrible farmer. I'm much better at HVAC. And as I went through and I became this helper, service technician, lead technician, project manager, up through the lines, teacher, educator, so on, there's something that I definitely had a certain mindset about. And this is something that helped keep my character in check. And that is the customer deserves the right solution. And it's kind of interesting because the customer for HVAC is not always right. The customer doesn't know what they actually need. They'll always say, I want more tonnage, or I want this, or I want that. That's not what they need. But what they deserve is the right solution. And it's my job to find, in all honesty, the right solution and the right fit for that customer. It's called reasoning from first principles. It's something that I've kind of stuck with, where I take the emotion out of it, whether I like the person, don't like the person, whatever, but I walk it down and I say, this is a great idea, but is it the right idea? This is a great solution, but is it the right solution for that customer? So that is the mindset that I think has helped me the most. And I still hold true today, is I reason down from first principles and I take the emotion out of it and I supply the right solution for that customer.
That's fantastic. I'm definitely going to take that away, because I've heard being in the customer service arena, the customer's always right. Well,
No.
maybe not.
Yeah.
And that is a unique perspective. And thank you very much for joining me and bringing that today. And like always, I love talking to you and going through the different changes that are coming. And I'm positive we will continue to have this discussion as it goes on.
Oh,
so
I feel like end of the year, when you're getting closer to that 410 deadline, where we're going to be running out of equipment and you're going to be trying to scramble. I'm sure we'll have more conversations, and I'm happy to have them. Paul, I love your podcast. You bring a great energy to this industry and a passion and love for it. So thank you so much from here. And as always, here with Chadwell Supply, it's awesome being a part of this.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks again for coming. And audience, thank you for joining us and spending your time with us today. And I'll see you somewhere. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Maintenance Mindset. I hope you take away ideas that apply to your current and future career goals. Please check out Maintenance Mindset Minute to hear short-form, high-impact, applicable, maintenance-centered information. Whatever you do today, do it with a maintenance mindset. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. Visit multifamilymedianetwork.com to learn more about our other industry podcasts, thought pieces, and sponsorship opportunities. I'll see you somewhere.